Why would the New York Times cover up one of the world's worst genocides for more than 50 years? From 1930 to 1933, one of the largest famines ever recorded struck Soviet Ukraine. 10% of the entire country starved to death in a place that had once been known as the breadbasket of Europe. But it wasn't a natural disaster like droughts or crop failures that triggered this catastrophe. It was directed Soviet policy. And this atrocity would later be known as the Holodomor. And it remains one of the largest genocides in human history. The question is, why has most of the world never heard of it? And the answer lies partly with the actions of Walter Duranty, the New York Times chief Moscow correspondent. Duranty intentionally downplayed and distorted the truth about the Holodomor, calling it a big scare story. Instead of reporting the truth, he falsely portrayed the Soviet Union as a workers' paradise, while ignoring the suffering and death that Stalin's brutal policies had inflicted on Ukraine. For years, Duranty's articles were published in the New York Times, and in turn, those articles influenced public opinion. This effectively concealed the truth of what was actually taking place. In fact, at the height of the Soviet-induced famine, Duranty published one story where he wrote that any report of a famine is an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. Duranty's reporting not only shielded the Soviet regime from international criticism, it earned him praise from Stalin himself. But if the New York Times and one of its top reporters were engaged in what have effectively amounted to genocide denial, how did anyone eventually learn about it? Well, there were some journalists with integrity who were willing to risk their own lives to expose the truths about Stalin's murderous regime. Among those were Gareth Jones and Malcolm Muggeridge. Muggeridge had even been a communist himself before witnessing firsthand how that system plays out in real life, while Gareth Jones' in-depth and accurate reporting of the extent of the famine in Ukraine would ultimately cost him his life at the hands of Stalin's NKVD, who kidnapped him and murdered him. Their accounts challenged Duranty's narrative and brought the truth closer to public awareness. Because of their work, many other newspapers did publish reports of a mass famine in Ukraine, but the influence of the New York Times and the reputation of Duranty meant that these accounts were hotly debated, with many in positions of power willing to disregard the horrors of Stalin on Duranty's word. It wouldn't be until the 1980s before the truth of the Holodomor began to receive wider recognition. The survivors' testimonies, archival evidence, and relentless efforts of scholars and researchers gradually exposed the full extent of the Ukrainian genocide, which is now estimated to have included between 5 and 7 million victims. But amazingly enough, it was not Muggeridge or Jones who would win the Pulitzer Prize for their writings, but Walter Duranty. Even after the full horror of the genocide was revealed, the Pulitzer board would refuse to rescind the award. Duranty would die with the accolades of the media establishment. But Jones and Muggeridge will be forever remembered by the families of the victims of a genocide that they had the courage to try and stop.